I just met with Desmond Meade, got my voting rights restored. No fines or fees, restitution paid.
From my understanding, he's completed all his sentence. Any financial obligations he had, he's taken care of that.
Michael Vick had his voting rights restored in September of 2020. Now, he is working with LeBron James' voting initiative to help restore voting rights to former felons.
What that initiative was about is, paying off fines for people who might have significant fines who keep them from voting.
Millions of United States citizens are being forced to pay for their right to vote. As of 2020, nearly 5.2 million Americans with felony convictions are banned from voting. Today, 48 states have some form of barrier to felon voter participation, with at least 30 states having laws that require former felons to pay before they can vote. In Arizona, for example, first-time offenders can have their voting rights restored after completing probation and paying off any fines or restitution. Repeat offenders must have their rights restored by a judge or through a petition to the court. But in Tennessee, former felons must pay all fines and fees and be up to date on child support payments before requesting restoration. Only 2 states, Maine and Vermont, and most recently Washington, D.C., do not strip felons of their voting rights and even allow them to vote while serving their sentence.
And what makes Maine and Vermont so different? They are majority white states, in the 90+% white. And so there is no fear of that population of people voting while they're incarcerated.
Today, there are still 11 states that permanently disenfranchise some people with felony convictions, including Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee.
But when you go to Florida, when you go to Alabama, when you go to a host of other states with significant populations of people of color, you see harsh felony disfranchisement laws. And most recent, Florida, Kentucky, Iowa, Alabama have sort of stood out for having the harshest felony disfranchisement laws.
Felony disenfranchisement has a deep-rooted political history in the U.S. Following the Civil War, the 14th and 15th Amendments, ratified in 1868 and 1870, were meant to secure voting rights for Black men. But shortly after the amendments were passed, new criminal laws were enacted that put Black communities at heightened risk of arrest. These arrests could lead to Black citizens losing their voting rights.
They did this by specifically carving out laws that were meant to punish people, and laws that didn't necessarily say I'm punishing you because you're Black, but laws that punished you because you were poor.
Therefore, you would see instances where you could lose your right for stealing a chicken, but you won't lose the right to vote for killing your wife.
These harsh criminal convictions continue to be used as a barrier to keep Black Americans from voting throughout the Jim Crow era, only to be intensified by Richard Nixon's war on drugs in the 70s.
America's public enemy number 1 in the United States is drug abuse.
Consequently, felony disenfranchisement rates skyrocketed from roughly 1.2 million in 1976 to 6.1 million in 2016. In the U.S., someone is arrested for drug possession every 25 seconds, and nearly 80% of people in federal prison for drug offenses are Black or Hispanic. And today, in states like Florida, there are still laws that hand down felony convictions for seemingly harmless acts.
Here in Florida, you can get a felony for driving with a suspended license, catching a lobster whose tail is too short. And the one that really shocked me the most was when a gentleman, rather than giving his significant other a dozen roses on Valentine's Day, chose to release 12 red balloons in the air. And he was arrested by a deputy that seen him do so. It's a 3rd-degree felony in the state of Florida. And if he was convicted, he would never be able to vote again unless the governor somehow or another shows him mercy.
With 29 electoral votes on the line, Florida has been a key battleground in almost every U.S. election. As of 2020, more than 1 in 7 Black residents in Florida are disenfranchised due to felony charges.
That felon disenfranchisement rule was on the books in Florida for 150 years. 150 years. That someone could have said, we know that's wrong, let's change it, but they chose not to do it. And so we took it upon ourselves to do it for them.
After incorporating the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition in 2011, Meade spearheaded a grassroots movement to pass Amendment 4, a law granting former felons the right to vote in Florida with the exclusion of those convicted of rape or murder. In November of 2018, Meade's team declared a historic victory after 65% of Floridians voted in favor of Amendment 4, granting at least 1.4 million former felons the right to vote. Civil rights advocates praised Amendment 4 as the most important piece of voting rights legislation since the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
I want to briefly lift up Florida because I think it is a source of hope in many ways, and people's truly fundamental belief in the political process and the democratic process and what has recently happened there. But it's also another cautionary tale, and in some ways, what a shame.
While Meade's team was celebrating the passing of Amendment 4, Florida's Republican-run legislature put the progressive win on pause. Florida Representative James Grant sponsored Senate Bill 7066 in response to the passing of Amendment 4. The bill stated that former felons must pay all fines associated with their case before their voting rights can be fully restored. After reaching Florida's Supreme Court, the bill was signed into law by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in June of 2019. In May 2020, the law was found unconstitutional by the United States District Court in Tallahassee. But the 11th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals overturned the lower court's ruling and the fee requirements were upheld. According to the New York Times, 5 of the 6 judges who upheld the additional requirements were appointed by President Trump.
The fact that Florida is stopping hundreds of thousands of people from voting before the 2020 consequential presidential election, there's a reason for that. And we know how close the election was in 2000, and we know how close elections have been since that time.
Experts say the bill effectively instituted a poll tax on former felons in the state. It's estimated that 774,000 of the 1.4 million former felons who had their voting rights restored are obligated to pay large sums of money before they can legally cast a ballot. For an idea of the size of these fees, Florida courts amassed over $250 million in criminal fines in 2018 alone. Nationally, formerly incarcerated citizens have a 27% unemployment rate, making it that much harder to pay off their debt. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, former felons who registered to vote in Florida following Amendment 4 earned $15,000 less than the average voter in the state. As the majority of formerly incarcerated Floridians struggle to regain financial footing, at least one Florida resident was able to cover his own fees and help pave the way for other disenfranchised voters to do the same. Former NFL quarterback Michael Vick grew up in Newport News, Virginia, a small city with a poverty rate roughly 5% above the national average. Growing up, Vick says he and his peers didn't believe their vote counted.
We kind of left it at that, man. It's like, it is what it is. And nobody educated us on it. Mom and dad didn't talk to us about it. And, we was seriously underprivileged. And we just looked at it as, we growing up in poverty. The world is going to exist the way it does. It's not going to include us anyway. And, it is what it is.
After completing his 23-month prison sentence in 2009 for dogfighting charges, Vick was sure he never have an opportunity to vote again.
There was never anyone around me talking about my voting rights other than my wife. And she was extremely concerned and always asked, when can you get your voting rights back? And when will you be able to get the felony expunged off your record. And I'm looking at her like, never. It's never going to happen.
Today, Vick is leveraging his fame and experience to help other formerly incarcerated Floridians regain their right to vote. And that's precisely why LeBron James tapped Vick's shoulder for his voting rights initiative, More Than a Vote, part of which is geared towards paying off the fees of formerly incarcerated people in Florida. Vick also worked closely with Desmond Meade to have his own rights restored. According to the Los Angeles Times, it's estimated that Vick faced up to $350,000 in fines, plus restitution.
So the process for me was obviously linking up with Desmond, figuring out if I had any fines that need to be paid.
Any court costs or fines in your case?
No court costs, no fines or fees.
I checked out in that box. And then just going through the initial process of filling out the paperwork, going into the voter registration, dropping the paperwork off, which was really cool.
As of July 2020, James Voting Rights Initiative donated $100,000 to Meade's organization. Fellow basketball star Michael Jordan also contributed $500,000 to the organization. And former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg made a $16 million contribution in September, which reinstated at least 31,000 people's voting rights.
While the state of Florida is fighting us tooth and nail, right, to hold democracy hostage, we have people like LeBron and Michael and so many others, thousands of people throughout the country have risen up and become like defenders of democracy or patriots or guardians of democracy. And they've said, you know what? No one should be denied the opportunity to vote simply because they're too poor to pay.
Recently, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis asked the state's attorney general to call an investigation into Bloomberg's donation. At the same time, legal advocates continue to fight against Senate Bill 7066, stating it violates the 24th Amendment, which banned the use of poll taxes.
And we're frankly seeing a retrogression back to some of the practices of my grandparents and great-grandparents, but Jim Crow was created and erected, it can be destroyed. And I feel the same way about voter suppression. If people can erect that system, we can definitely tear it down, but it requires vigilance, it requires work.
Researchers and advocates are paying close attention to turnout amongst re-enfranchised voters. A 2015 report from Harvard University's Journal of Political Science studied Iowa's brief re-enfranchisement effort in 2005, which automatically restored voting rights to former felons who completed their sentences. The study found that only 15% of re-enfranchised voters in Iowa participated in the 2008 presidential election, highlighting the need for greater education around voting rights.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people don't know what it takes to get your voting rights back, and they think that the hurdles are so hard to overcome that, they don't lend any time, effort, or thought to, what it takes to vote. And I can attest, I was one of those guys. I didn't put any time or effort into it. I kind of left it where it was, and that's why I want to be an instrument of change in that regard.
And education is a core piece of Meade's platform, as his organization works to engage newly enfranchised voters in both federal and local elections.
It's very easy when you talk about re-enfranchising 1.4 million to just solely focus on, wow, that will definitely impact presidential elections, or local elections are even more important. It definitely could have a tremendous impact on who is actually governing our communities, who are deciding the type of education that our children should have, and the type of health care that we should have, and to actually challenge people to reimagine what public safety really looks like.
Through efforts of leaders like Meade, James, and Vick, thousands of re-enfranchised felons will feel the power of voting for the first time in 2020. And for some, it's worth the cost.
I recorded the whole process because I just wanted to look back on these moments and show my kids how much it meant to me, and that in trying times I'm trying to be a leader. So, I'm not going to ever, regret what I've done. in life and what led to me being in that disposition, I'm only going to look at the position I'm in as a positive and how I made the most out of it.